She's been a huge part of many series, including Metroid Prime, Paper Mario, and more. But as she seems set to become the heir to the Metroid Prime franchise itself, who is Risa Tabata, and what do we actually know about her? In this video, we will be looking back through years of past interviews, reviewing her credits, and trying to identify what the future may hold for this significant figure in the Nintendo development space. Let's start by winding the clock back to her childhood in the 80s and 90s. Risa Tabata noted that she wasn't really the type to get completely absorbed in games to begin with, but nevertheless, she did have an interest in them. In an untranslated Iwata Asks segment, with the English version here courtesy of Google Translate, she said, "I bought a Famicom when I was in 6th grade, and at the time the Super Famicom was popular. I played games like Super Mario Bros. With my younger brother, who was 2 years younger than me. When I entered high school, I stopped playing games completely, but when I was a university student, I happened to walk into a game shop and bought a Game Boy Color and Mario's Picross, which I played a little by myself when I had free time." Tabata also had a creative streak, speaking of the joy of creating and expressing things through theatre, which she expressed as part of her college drama club. She still loves theatre and goes to see performances, but her university course was foreign languages, majoring in Chinese. Inspired by the time she spent playing games with her brother, she decided it would be interesting to apply to Nintendo's graduate recruitment program. However, where she ended up turned out to be quite the surprise. As she recounted to Iwata in 2007, "I was originally a liberal arts major, so when I joined Nintendo, I was 100% sure I'd end up in an administrative position. However, when the assignment announcement was made, I was told, 'Tabata-san, you'll be in the Information Development Division,' and I remember being very flustered, asking, 'What kind of department is that?' Because I'd assumed I'd be doing administrative work. I hardly heard anything about the development section during the orientation shortly after joining the company." Tabata soon found out that her ability to speak English conversationally was to be put to good use, and she was assigned as an English specialist in the department of Kensuke Tanabe. Tanabe was a veteran of Nintendo already as the director of Doki Doki Panic, which was rebranded as Super Mario Bros. 2 in the West, as well as a course designer on Super Mario Bros. 3 and a script writer for Zelda: A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening. Although he already had experience as a supervisor on titles like Kirby's Block Ball, Pokemon Snap, and Eternal Darkness, he was the co-producer of Metroid Prime and soon took over as the head of the department responsible for a number of external collaborations, including the Metroid Prime and Paper Mario series. Risa Tabata was going to follow him to work with Retro Studios. As it turned out, conversational English was a bit of a learning curve for Tabata. Because of her focus on Chinese during her university course, she had been away from speaking English for quite a while, and she struggled at first, noting in 2007 that even if she had been at work all day, when she would go into a new setting like a restaurant, the only words that would come to mind were scary words like fire. In communication at Retro, if she didn't know a word, she would use her expression and say it with all her heart, although this strategy proved trickier over email. Still, things like conveying that since Samus is wearing a helmet, they wanted to use this as a gameplay element led to the shaping of the iconic Metroid Prime series into what it has become today. At first, she was wowed by the Retro Studios' graphical capabilities and the solid physics programming, commenting that she came to understand how Hollywood movies looked so cool. But she was also able to focus in on the emotional dimensions that she wanted to put into the games, saying, "I myself have learned how to make games through my involvement with this series. One thing I found very important was to create a game while imagining the emotions of the audience. So when I met with the people at Retro Studios, I made sure to convey to them the importance of not just making something cool, but also being aware of what the player might be thinking in that scene and what I, as a creator, want them to feel." From Metroid Prime 2, Kensuke Tanabe took over as a full producer in his own right for the series, which meant that Tabata was to step up as an assistant producer, a role she has held on every Retro Studios Metroid Prime project up to and including Metroid Prime 4. Even then, there was a learning curve, with Brian Walker noting on the Kiwi Talks podcast that when he sent a Gantt chart in a Microsoft project format to her, she replied that she didn't know what an MPP file was. Walker speculated that perhaps these productivity tools adopted from Retro Studios became useful even for the core Japanese development teams. In another Kiwi Talks interview, engineer Paul Tozor recounted that Risa Tabata and Kensuke Tanabe would come from Japan once every month or two to supervise things like character design, which would often involve complete changes. However, Tabata was fairly dedicated to Metroid Prime. Indeed, although she kibitz as a supervisor on a Japan-only DS trivia game and did a turn voice act for WarioWare Touched in 2004, her first 6 years at Nintendo were basically completely dedicated to the Metroid Prime series, earning the praise of Satoru Iwata for her skills demonstrating Metroid Prime 3's gameplay, as well as the respect of retro staff such as Mike Wicken, who called her brilliant. By the third entry, Tabata was deeply involved with the development of the game's trajectory. She recounted in a 2007 interview, "At first we were struggling to find an outstanding idea regarding what should make up the core of Metroid Prime 3. We wanted something new for Prime 3 because we did not want to make it just like an advanced version of Metroid Prime and Metroid Prime 2. We had ideas for new activities in the game, but did not have the idea for the core theme of the game. In the process of thinking about the game, a member of staff at Retro put forward an idea that Samus could turn into Dark Samus. I thought this was a winning idea when I heard it because Samus has always been a heroine and had never been evil. Then we started thinking about what becoming Dark Samus actually meant and decided it probably meant gradually becoming evil or being corrupted. Then we asked what would bring about this corruption before coming up with this final setting that mainly focuses on the theme of corruption. Personally, I wanted to create a feature that makes your blood freeze in the fear that you may become Dark Samus. Does that sound like Japanese-style horror? I also wanted to provide some definitive information about the phase-on material that has appeared throughout the Prime series." End quote. However, at the start of Metroid Prime 3, far from continuing to enthuse with Retro about their graphical capabilities, she had a tough message to deliver about the Wii's specs, recounting, "I think the people at Retro Studios believed that the direction in which the game console should be developed in the future was one in which graphics would become increasingly beautiful, calculation speeds would become extremely fast, and various functions would be added. However, when they received a proposal for a completely different direction for Revolution, they seemed to feel strongly that this won't do." End quote. Thankfully, Retro were won round by the prototype, and the focus soon became on the control scheme. Tabata and Tanabe both experienced motion sickness easily, and Tabata explained her reasoning for focusing on this as follows. "Especially in Japan, first-person games are not very popular because people think first-person games are difficult to control and are likely to give you motion sickness. So we thought more people will enjoy playing first-person games if we can make one that is easy to control and is less likely to make players feel sick. Retro was able to make the easy-to-use control scheme, so we Japanese staff rather paid attention to how we can prevent people from feeling sick, and even inexperienced players can play comfortably." Even as Metroid Prime 3 finished production in the West, Tanabe and Tabata had a massive job to do, spending 6 months painstakingly not just translating but rewriting the text to be suitable for Japanese readers. However, even as they said goodbye for now to the Metroid Prime series, the Tanabe-Tabata partnership was about to become a source of many major Nintendo titles. Captain Rainbow, Punch-Out, and several new Play Control re-releases of GameCube titles came out of their group in the late 2000s, followed by their next Retro Studios project, Donkey Kong Country Returns. Tabata had no prior experience of the Donkey Kong franchise, which allowed her to be an outside perspective on matters including developing the music in the absence for that game of David Wise. She recounted, "When I became involved with this project, I knew the people who were already passionate about the series would shoulder the load when it came to incorporating what had been good in the older games, so I knew I could focus all my attention on making something as fun as possible, something no one had ever seen before." Retro's senior designer Tom Ivey painted a colourful picture of Tabata's energy levels, recalling, "Toward the end of development, we were working all night more often, and about 5 o'clock in the morning here in Texas, we'd have a telephone conference. We were absolutely exhausted, but Tabata-san was full of beans. It was like noon in Japan. She'd be brimming with life and enjoying herself immensely as she made immensely tough requests for us to change something." End quote. In this case, Risa Tabata got her first chance to lead the direction of development for Nintendo as Kensuke Tanabe was laid up with lower back pain and had a week off. Tabata admits she was pretty tough on the Retro team. As Retro's senior designer at the time, Mike Wicken, explained, there was an enemy covered in tufts of hair. We made 5 of them stacked on top of each other. They fall over toward Donkey Kong when he gets close, and then he beats them by stomping on them. But when I showed Tabata-san what I had made, she said, this isn't what I had in mind. We remade it and had her look over and over again, but she always said it needed more work. There were a lot of technological tasks involved, but before I knew it, that spot was turning out to be as much work as making one boss. For her part, Tabata explained, at first there was no tactical element to enjoy. Tabata's enthusiasm for Donkey Kong Country Returns is clear to see in her Iwata Asks interview, as she is the first to jump in to name specific levels, even when others are not sure, and when asked for her own favourite parts of the game, she was able to give 3 and seems full of enthusiasm. She also noted that she liked being able to share Donkey Kong Country with her parents. She had shown them Metroid Prime, but Donkey Kong was a chance for them to finally play a game together. Although she was still being credited as a co-producer or assistant producer, she was focusing on fewer games than Kensuke Tanabe, and it seemed that a large amount of time was given to her work with Retro. That said, she also supported in direction and game design for Game & Wario, and worked with Tanabe on the creation of a brand new franchise in Dylan's Rolling Western. In particular, she got to propose her own suggestions for the enemies in the game, recalling in a Nintendo World Report interview, I remember this old Chinese tale where they used these dumplings instead of people to sacrifice to God. So that's how we came up with the design of Scruffles, which were originally called manju, which is dumplings in Japanese. I like to say manju like kaiju in the movie Pacific Rim. She also came up with the concept of incorporating snacks into Chibi Robo Ziplash, although this did somewhat backfire as she ended up with the task of reaching out to 30 different snack food companies for the Japanese version of the game. Kensuke Tanabe recounted with laughter. Around this time in Japan it is super hot and humid, so she was wearing her business attire, walking around the whole country, travelling to present this idea to all these people. I myself was sitting in the office just chilling, thinking she's going through such a hard labour. Tanabe by now was an experienced assistant producer, but she had mainly worked on Donkey Kong and Metroid Prime. 2016 was a new first for her, Paper Mario. She explained, I think because I didn't have experience in the previous titles, I was able to provide good insight on how to make Color Splash enjoyable for someone who would be new to the series. So I'm always thinking about what's new, what can be done that hasn't been done before. I hope that maybe I've been able to come up with some gags or ideas that haven't been thought of before. Yeah, I think if you're always doing the same thing, you don't really get inspiration to do something new, so that's what I hope with this. If this quote falls flat for some Paper Mario fans who weren't enormously impressed with Color Splash, it's worth pointing out that this rather curious reflection on Metroid Prime 3, curious at least in the light of the way Kensuke Tanabe was determined to take Metroid Prime 4, might give a different emphasis on what she thinks. She said back then, personally, I am skeptical about the assumption that voice acting has enhanced the Metroid experience. If you hear a human voice, you will feel someone's existence nearby, and it may contradict the Metroid Prime series concept where we put importance on a feeling of loneliness. Whatever we develop, we will always want to carefully think if it fits well. However, players may understand the storyline better because of voice acting since they are hearing and not reading. That's not to say you don't have to read any text. You can discover new things by using the scan function. This gives you a feeling that you discovered something on your own. End quote. Perhaps because she was busy on Color Splash, or perhaps because she was more keen on the emphasis on loneliness, or perhaps for another reason altogether, she was completely out of the picture on Metroid Prime Federation Force, even though Kensuke Tanabe was involved. Although, as the 2020s dawned and she moved into the project management team, she did get to work with Next Level Games on Mario Strikers Battle League, as well as returning to WarioWare for the first time since Game & Wario as the project manager for WarioWare Move It. It's clear that she has an understanding about how to use Nintendo's console tech, talking about finding effective utilizations of the specific abilities of new hardware, but she also recognizes the need to balance the different types of RPGs, explaining how she differentiated Paper Mario from the different type of Mario RPGs, explaining how she differentiated Paper Mario from the concurrent Mario and Luigi RPG series. Even in 2005, Risa Tabata was ambitious, saying, "In the future, I'd like to be able to do things on my own, not just support." Well, in 2024, she got her wish, as her first game as producer was published. Granted, it was a remake, Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, but in some ways, for a woman who was an outside on 2016 Color Splash, revisiting what maybe in terms of critical reception at least, the series Apex might have made a lot of sense as a next step towards taking over the Paper Mario franchise. If the next Retro Studios game were to be a remaster of Metroid Prime 2, this would also be a terrific example of bringing things full circle by having a return to a game that she knew very well indeed from her early work at Nintendo. All that said, her credit on Metroid Prime 4 is interesting because she is given the dual credit of assistant producer and progress management. Given how long the game was in development, it seems likely that she started the game's development as the assistant producer and surely had a large hand in its development, but with so many other credits to her name and with Tanabe having a strong focus on Metroid Prime 4 specifically, the progress manager credit might suggest that she was focused more on the logistical issues of coordinating many studios than being Tanabe's number two in quite the same way that she had been on previous projects. Even if this were to be true, I doubt it would affect her position as the heir apparent for the Metroid Prime series, and indeed, having greater experience through the progress management team might be a critical part of her development towards being one of Nintendo's key producers. With Kensuke Tanabe having announced his retirement at the start of 2026, Risa Tabata seems more than ready to serve as his replacement. With Tanabe gone, not only does she have an unparalleled depth of experience in Japan with the Metroid Prime series, but she also has experience of all manner of production activities, as well as game direction, scripting, and fine-tuning gameplay mechanics. I fully expect her to continue to be a major player in Nintendo's games going forward. On this channel, I like to put down markers for the future in percentage forms. These aren't based on deep algorithms, just snapshots of my judgment for future reference, although you can see my track record based on previous roundups on the screen. However, based on this, I would say it's 90% likely that Risa Tabata will be a producer on another game by the end of 2029, probably Paper Mario, possibly even WarioWare or Metroid Prime. These kinds of research-heavy videos sometimes don't do that well on the algorithm, so I especially appreciate my Patreon supporters who allow me to take these kinds of swings more often. If you're interested in early, ad-free and exclusive content, do check out the Patreon below, but irrespective, I really appreciate you watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.